I've had a lot of conversations about sexual trafficking in particular, because our focus is women. And very often this problem is looked at as an embarrassing problem. It's an embarrassment. How do we get rid of that embarrassment? So that's one way of looking at it. How do you cover it up or sweep it under the rug or find some quick solutions for it? And the other issue, the other way of looking at it, is how fundamental a moral failure is this? And I'm talking to all of you because in all Abrahamic religions, there is no question but that this is a moral failure. We are in the United States, which prides itself on being a country which believes in faith, as opposed to some other countries in Europe that are quite more extremely secular. And yet, we've heard scandals about sexual trafficking emanating from circles of faith in this country and in Muslim countries. And we ask ourselves, how do we get there? Why is there this moral failure? And I think it's very important to try to understand what brought us to that point. There are many points in history where a certain development would bring you to that point. But in our particular historical moment, I think part of what brought us to this moment is compartmentalization, is separation of who you are Monday through whatever your weekend is, and then your religious weekend. And we were talking in my organization about what can KARAMAH do to eliminate this problem. Because we understand as jurists that in Islam this is not acceptable. In fact, it says very clearly in the Quran, and we have to distinguish between those who voluntarily want to behave in certain ways. That's not really my concern. But there are those who are forced for one reason or the other, mostly economic, wars, as you mentioned, and so on, to do what they never wanted to do. Not only that, but if they are either forced by economics or by physical coercion through rape, then what we don't talk about is the fact that these people's lives, the rest from that point on, are ruined. And what you really need to do is try to talk to these women and educate them that God has not forsaken them. And God forgives. And there are clear verses in the Quran which addresses men, basically, and they say, do not force women into prostitution. And the next part of the verse says, but if they have been forced into it, and it happened, God is merciful and forgiving. So part of what we need to worry about is not only putting a stop to sexual trafficking, but also to picking up these women who think that their life has ended, God has forsaken them, and they are guilty. They're responsible for what happened to them, not somebody else. And educate them and help them cross that condition to become healthier members of society. We are looking into this to go and also give these women some training so that they are not economically dependent anymore and they can move on into a life of their choice. The Quran is very clear that you cannot force people into prostitution. And yet, we find people who are religious doing it. How does that happen? That's the gap in consciousness that I'm talking about. I remember going to a major Muslim country, and I will not mention names. And it was arranged that I would be meeting with the human rights, Minister of Human Rights in that country. I walked in, as you see me, and in his office, which was a large, luxurious office, there were at least 10 men in religious outfits, garb, sitting there. They're very polite people. They looked at me and they said, the minister said, welcome. So you're coming to us from the United States? I said, yes. And you're gonna tell us about Islam and women? Please do. Very polite, very gentle, but I understood the message. This was a very Muslim country. And he was asking me, what am I doing coming all the way from the US to preach to them about Islam and women? And of course, it was not an easy sight to see all these men surrounding me, waiting for me to speak. So I made a deal with him. I said, you give me 40 minutes to speak. Don't interrupt. And after that, I challenge you to disagree with me. And he said, okay. So I started by talking about a very delicate subject in Islamic jurisprudence. That's the concept of wilaya, or taking care of, or guardianship, or whatever, there are different interpretations of it with respect to women. And of course, they thought, coming from the US, I'm here to contest that and say, come on, why do we have that concept? So instead I said, this is I do think it's a valuable concept, properly interpreted, because women do need advisors about the affairs of men and so on. I said, and you have spent so much time, of your valuable time, all of you, talking about this one issue concerning your wives and daughters and so on. And yet you all know that it is an established Islamic rule that the state, or the head of state, is the wali, the guardian of those who have no wali. So what are all these Muslim women doing? Panhandling in the streets of Paris, or being forced into trafficking in other countries? And there was a hush. Clearly, this government had enough money to save these women. Why aren't they saving them? There is no good Islamic argument. They couldn't say, she's in Paris, I'm here, I cannot help her. That's not a good Islamic argument. So we went through a discussion about that, and when I was done, the minister, all of them, said, if you need help, we will help. So right now, a country, again, I will not mention names, who has been the recipient of war refugees, and therefore has the supply, so to speak, contacted KARAMAH and asked us if we could do something to solve this problem. And what I would like to do is solve it on both sides. That is, pass laws not only on the supply side, but the demand side countries, to make sure that this behavior is curtailed. Instead of having the women in my organization sitting and each group blaming the other country, you are exploiting our women, no, your women are full of guile and they are tempting and seducing our men. This is a kind of conversation. That doesn't work. So I believe that the most forceful argument in Muslim society to end this kind of behavior is the religious, moral argument. That is, this force of this recognition that this is not about being embarrassed before the West or before your brethren or before I don't know who. It's not about that. It's about your soul. It's about how God is looking at you. Will God look at you in the afterlife? Do you really find any justification for this kind of behavior? And there aren't any. So what is holding us? What is paralyzing us? What's paralyzing us is our secular interests in the world. It's our worldly seductions. And that can only be fought through education. The bottom line, as far as this problem, is the separation in our lives between the daily modern life and the life of faith. And when we decide that we're going to be one person, not a fragmented, compartmentalized person, but one consistent person with values that we can talk about to others, just like the others could talk to us about the secular values, when we reach that point, we will be able to accomplish what we need to accomplish. Thank you.